Alright, so hello. I'm actually primarily, I guess, just making this video for Benjamin and Tricia. You guys are the only ones who sent me questions. And that's fine. I wasn't expecting a ton of people to necessarily watch the whole thing, especially since it's 2.5 hours, and they would have had to at least watched a significant amount of it to have questions by now, just a few hours later. In hindsight, it might have been better to put it a week out. Although I feel like even at that point, a lot of people might not necessarily have watched the whole thing. 2.5 hours is really long, especially for it being a more academic type presentation, and a lot of people just finished the semester, so they're not probably excited about something like that right now. But however it goes, I am extremely grateful, Ben and Tricia, that you guys sent me questions, and I'm very excited to answer them. I read through them, and I'm just going to give my thoughts and what I kind of think about what you guys said, and then I'll wrap up this video, and then I'll post it so you guys can see it. So, without further ado. So your first question says, first, an overarching question. What initially drew you to adopt a computer-based metaphor for understanding the structure of life rather than, say, a more biological-based metaphor? Part of that is probably related to the fact that I know a lot more about computers than I do about biology. I have done a bit of coding before. I did a few semesters in engineering before switching to psychology. So my brain probably thinks more along the lines of computers than biology by default. But I will say at the same time, within my understanding of computers and how they work, it's a system that was created to do certain things and it has programming. And since biological things have programming for what they're doing, I think that in my mind they parallel very closely because it's just a programmed system. And as far as I can tell, the more we study biology, and especially biopsychology, where you're studying the biology of the brain, the more we seem to learn that you can find specific parts of the brain which manage certain kinds of activities and behaviors. And of course, as I've been becoming more healthy, I've also noticed how much the way that I treat my physical body affects the way that my brain actually works. There are countless examples of this being a reality, that our consciousness and our behavior and decision-making and our personality are based on the functioning of our physical brain, with little reason to think there's anything else going on. Because, one of the stories that kind of disturbed me back when I was an undergrad was there's a story of a guy who suddenly started raping one of his daughters, and of course he got put in prison. But then they did an MRI scan of his brain at some point. Why, I'm not entirely sure. He might have been sick or something. And they found that he had a big tumor in his brain. And when they removed the tumor, then his personality changed back. And they kind of realized that the tumor growing in his brain had kind of caused extreme unusual behavior. And after that, he was actually able to go back and live with his family. I can imagine that would have been really hard, because you don't do something like that and then just return peacefully back. But there seemed to be an element where he was outside of the control of his behavior. He didn't have control over it, but it was impacted by something that was biologically based, 100%. Or at least mostly. There's another story of a guy who was a young dude, and he was trying to break the record for staying awake as long as possible, and breaking the record for the longest consecutive number of hours awake. And he ended up staying awake for I don't know if it was 7 to 9 days or something. And when he finally slept and then woke back up, his personality completely changed, and his ability to use his what I was calling the conscious brain, his ability to be self-controlled and have delayed gratification and a lot of those things, I completely went out the window, and his life went downhill very quickly. He became a very irritable, impatient person who was very impulsive. Whereas before the experiment, he was, I think, actually doing pretty well in university and had a really good life going and a likable person. So when we don't give our brains the sleep that they need, then they malfunction, and then our personality fundamentally changes. The way that we behave changes. And then, of course, like with me recently, I've even noticed that when I eat differently, my mood is different, I treat people differently, I feel differently, I act differently in the world. So I guess when I think about the reason why behavior changes when we don't treat the brain in a certain way, or when things in the brain go wrong, or like examples like antisocial personality disorder, where you have people who are actually born with brains where the empathy part is either non-existent or severely broken. Another example of where like the brain goes wrong and then suddenly something doesn't look so human as it used to, because suddenly they don't have the biological mechanical hardware or software, as it were, that they would need to feel feelings for the well-being of other people, which is something that most of the rest of us have. And that's kind of what makes us not all sociopaths, and what makes us moral, is that we care about how other people are doing. Which is, yeah. So that is my thoughts on the first question. The second question, regarding vision, if what you think you want isn't necessarily what you really want, won't keeping clear your vision of what you want, that is, what you think you want, potentially block you from achieving what you actually really want? So, there's a lot of wording in that. Hopefully I don't misunderstand it. But I think regarding vision, I do know that once I finished making the video, I was slightly annoyed because I didn't feel like I really drove that point home. After I made, at the beginning I talked about vision, but I didn't drive home at the end what vision would look like. So, the way I'd answer that question is that in Martin Seligman's book, Flourish, he talks about the elements of a flourishing life, the things that are present in people's lives who are the happiest and who are the most satisfied with their lives in a very deep, consistent way. And one of the huge elements to vision for me would be that for any human being, wisdom would say that you would want to pursue those things. That, like, for any human being, in order for you to feel like your life matters, in order for you to feel like your life is worth living, then you want to incorporate those things. And thinking that you don't want those things would be kind of foolish. The second thing is that, and again, I didn't really cover this toward the end, but something like mindfulness, meditation, and emotional processing, those are ways of, becoming a lot better understanding what it is that you really want. That has to do with paying attention to how you feel in the world and understanding that, oh, when I eat really shitty food, it makes me feel really bad. And rather than just being concerned about how it tasted the moment you ate it, being also concerned about how your body feels after you digested it, and whether your body liked it, or whether it's causing your body pain or causing your body to malfunction. And being in tune with the emotions that are actually happening inside of you, is what I think the vision is centered around, where it's like, having vision for your life is being able to see past the easy to jump to conclusions, and using wisdom, and then also using research in psychology, and then self-awareness to create yourself a vision of who you want to be in the world and what you want your life to look like. So, for me, drawing on the vision versus mission idea that I mentioned in the video, my life vision is that I know that I am very confident this is going to be true for me till the day I die, because it's been true for me to date for every year of my life. I love making peace between people. I love figuring out how the world works, and I love teaching people. So, my life vision, it's like, the world definitely needs more peace, and the world needs people understanding how things actually work. So, my life vision to me is pretty clear. I want to spend my life making peace between people, and specifically I want to do that by helping people become more empathetic, and I want to do that by teaching people rational things about how the world actually works to the best of our current understandings in science and psychology. So, how that's going to look, I have no idea. That might constantly change over the course of my life. But I feel pretty confident that in 50 or 60 years, if I'm still out in the world doing things, I'm still going to be out in the world teaching people about how the world works and trying to make peace in the world. And I have complete peace about all the decisions I'm making in my life right now, because all of them are centered around that. So like when I'm thinking about, what job should I get? How am I going to make money? What are my relationships going to look like? Who do I want to get married to? All of them are being answered in the context of, is this a legitimate way for me to get closer to being somebody who's making peace in the world? And there are a million different ways that it could end up looking. Those are the missions, and it's like, there's not necessarily a right one, and a lot of it for me is just going to be trial and error. Trying the YouTube thing. I may go to grad school at some point, probably more out of curiosity and learning than about getting any kind of degree for a job. But yeah, and if the YouTube thing doesn't work, or then grad school doesn't work, then I'll go and I'll try to find something else and do something else. But I have my crystal clear vision, and then I also have my values, which I love and appreciate beauty and art, and that makes me love languages, and that makes me love traveling and understanding other cultures. So part of what I also want to do along the way is go live in other countries and learn other languages and learn about other cultures. But there's also a level where, like, as I was talking about with contentment and letting go, part of our capacity to be happy is to be content and to make the most of what we have and to be grateful for what we have. And so I will always maintain an attitude of being grateful and happy, but I'm also, so much as opportunities provide themselves as I continually try and press forward, I would also like to include adventures in my life, like climbing mountains, learning new languages, visiting other countries to learn the culture. And then, of course, the big thing that I'm not willing to compromise on, that for me is what gives my life meaning and value, is I am somebody who has the capacity to teach people things that will create more empathy in the world and create more peace in the world. And that is, when I wake up in the morning, I get excited about that more than anything else. And whether it's global and on the YouTube scale and, on the international scale, or whether it's just me and my group of friends, helping my friends become better friends with each other, like, either way, when I go to bed at the end of the day, I'm like, I love who Nehemiah is. I love what Nehemiah is doing in the world. And one day I'm going to die, and I feel very happy and satisfied with the legacy I've already left in the world regarding teaching people and making peace in the world. So I guess to just really narrow back in on your question, I think that what I actually really want, and I think for any human being what you actually really want, is never going to be 100% crystal clear necessarily, but if we are self-aware, and if we also look to psychology and wisdom, I think we can develop a close enough understanding of what it is that we want, that we're close enough that our lives will be more than enough. Because life isn't about maximizing necessarily, but just having something that is good enough that you can be content and okay with it. So, yeah. Your third question says, you talk quite a bit about feelings and making sure our feelings are accurately calibrated to reality. But having lived in the world almost twice as long as you, we notice that feelings dominate our lives our life much less than they did 20 to 25 years ago. This leads us to suspect that emotions are a major factor in younger person's life and become less of a guiding factor later in life. So, if this is accurate beyond our own experience, is your philosophy primarily relevant for younger people? I can kind of see what you're saying, and I could see how, on some level, this kind of philosophy might be a little bit more geared toward younger people, especially since younger people are going to be a lot less certain and a lot less clear about what their life vision is and what their values are. Especially since some of those things you kind of have to develop through experience and not just meditation and things like that, although those are a huge part of how you get there. At the same time, I can think of tons and tons and tons of adults in my life who are much older, who never learned that listening to their feelings was important, who probably have tons of suppressed emotions, and they're very irritable, and they can get angry very quickly, or they make very irrational decisions at times. And the fact that they do that shows that they don't understand what's going on emotionally inside of them. And a philosophy like this would potentially be a place for them to start out to be like, I want to become a little bit more congruent, where what I know is rationally going to make sense is what actually feels good for me. And in order for them to start making that move, they have to start listening to their emotions instead of suppressing them, which again, I think counseling is a great place to start for anybody. And then as you start listening to your emotions, then you can start figuring out how to make congruent your emotions versus your rational thoughts. And yeah, I don't know. I would be interested to hear how other people describe what their lives are like as they get older with regards to emotion. I think that I would still argue that even if emotions in your guys' life are less powerful, Yeah, so I would still argue 100% that 100% of your behavior, no matter what age, is emotionally derived. You are never going to behave in a way that makes you feel like you're doing something wrong. That's an emotion. That's your internal emotional program where you don't want to do things that make you feel bad. And the things that make you feel bad have to do with some program you came with, and also, and maybe this is kind of what you're referring to, over the course of your life, you reorient your emotions, as I talked about, and as you alluded to in the question. And maybe there's a perception that the more you calibrate your feelings to reflect reality, it starts to feel a lot more like you're just being rational, as opposed to being emotional. But I think that could be simply that when you constantly feel good, because you're congruent and what you're doing rationally agrees with your emotions, then you're just going to feel good all the time, and it doesn't feel as emotional because you don't have that really intense dichotomy of wanting to do one thing but acting in a different way. Or, I don't know. I'm just kind of conjecturing a little bit, I guess. I have a hard time believing there's ever going to be a time in my life when I don't feel intensely emotional about everything, because I mean, I certainly think that it's probably going to become a little less fiery than it is right now when I get older, but so much about me and the way I experience the world is just so emotional. Like, everything to me is emotional, and I just, like, it makes me happy. Like, I love watching movies or reading books where, like, I relate to the main character. Like, it just gets me really worked up, but I love that. And I can't imagine when I get older, I'm going to be like, But I don't know. We'll see. I would be very interested to hear what some other older people would say about their experience emotionally in the world as they got older. And it would actually be interesting even to hear from you guys a little bit more clarification about what you mean that emotions play less of a role now than they did, or less dominant place. I would appreciate some clarification on that, actually. to kind of understand what you guys really mean. And just to address, you specifically said, making sure our feelings are calibrated to reality. For me, and I guess I kind of already said this, but I just think that it's incredibly important to make sure that the way that you're feeling is calibrated to reality. And that's not going to, like, dictate all of your emotions about a bunch of things, but that dictates your emotions that have to do with logic. I don't know if I'm going to be able to explain that succinctly. Like, I used the example in the video where if you are in a relationship and somebody hurts you, then it can make you feel like you can't trust anybody. But rationally, that doesn't make sense. There are people out there who you can trust. And so recalibrating your emotions is about not allowing that bad experience to make it so that you never have good relationships for the rest of your life. So recalibrating your emotions is about being like, actually, I can trust certain people. And it's really hard to do that, but it's going to be necessary to do that if you want to be happy and fulfilled by having close, intimate relationships over the course of your life. And there are about 100 million ways that happens with different things. I've been recalibrating tons of my emotions. And then maybe, like I said, if you guys did a lot of work on that, and I think people who do a lot of work on that when they're younger and recalibrate their emotions so that they have a really good intellectual and intuitive sense of, like, who can I trust and who can I not trust, and what is a reasonable expectation to have for different situations, and one that's kind of congruent with reality and you're expecting what's actually going to happen, and you're able to trust what's trustworthy and not trust what isn't trustworthy, then your emotional experience is going to be a lot more smooth. And then potentially maybe you don't even pay attention to your emotions as much because there's so much congruence and it's going so smooth. And then the last question. You are aware of the importance of the group for determining the shape of morality, and you mentioned the potential difficulty of finding yourself going along with the group and behaviors that you don't actually think are right. In the end, though, you seem to come down on the side of morality being primarily group-oriented, so that in order to act ethically, you really have to be acting for the sake of your group. But what if your group is bad to other people? What if you're a German in the Nazi time, or a Hutu, or a Tutsi? What resources would you have for resisting your own group's morality, or what sense would you make of an individual morality in this case? This is actually probably the easiest question out of all of the ones you asked. Because my argument, and I think Sam Harris actually has arguments along these lines, although I would be interested, I do want to go read his to see what he says. But my argument is not that our moral feelings is what's moral. My argument is that collectively human beings are programmed for a morality which has individual and group well-being in mind above all else. So it's entirely possible for smaller subgroups or individuals to have feelings which are not in the interest of either individuals or in the interest of the group, in which case their behaviors are immoral, not in a supernatural sense, but simply in that they are irrationally... So, not irrationally. The morality comes, like... If as human beings, and of course for any evolutionary creature this kind of makes sense, that we evolved to want to be healthy and to reproduce and to maintain our existence. And so morality for human beings is really just a group manifestation of how do we negotiate behavior among each other so that we're all keeping each other's interest in mind. And you can rationally, logically decide whether a behavior is healthy or unhealthy, or whether it's good or not good for a group. And what the Nazis did is irrational for reasons that I outlined in my video. What they did was not in the best interest of all people, what they were doing was way off. So I would say that we have programming emotionally for behaving certain ways and doing certain things, and one of those things we're programmed for is to not resist the group and to go along with the group, because for our own individual self-preservation, we have to be careful about upsetting groups that we're in. But this is where you're going to want to be able to recalibrate your feelings to be accurate, and accuracy is going to come from a logical, calculated look at the world and understanding what is in the best interest of the entire group and also the individuals. There's a little bit variation there sometimes, I think. And you have to figure out what's rational, and then you need to calibrate your emotional feelings to be in line with that, because otherwise you're going to be behaving in ways that aren't necessarily actually really in your best interest or the best interest of the group. You're just responding to the way that you emotionally feel, which is not necessarily good. And to bring it back to the big 5 major things that Martin Seligman brought up, the thing is, those are what actually make us happy. Like, I think it's so easy to constantly get caught up in thinking that pleasure and just the positive emotion is where human beings want to be, and it's not where we want to be. And even though we kind of have a predisposition to aim for those things, again, I would argue that it's extremely irrational for a human being to pursue those things too strongly, because it's not going to make them happy. So, like, the Nazis, what they did wasn't going to make them happy. So therefore, it was irrational for them to do that thing, because even though they thought that it's what they wanted, I would argue it's not what they actually wanted, because it was not in their personal well-being or the group's well-being interest for them to have done what they did. There's no rational way to justify that. So, yeah. So those are my answer to your guys' 4 questions. Thank you guys so much for sending me questions. I'm excited. You guys at least sent me questions when I didn't get many others. If you have some responses to any of my questions, or if you want to especially clarify question number 3, or any other questions that you feel like maybe didn't understand, I would love to hear your guys' response. I super appreciate you guys and your support, and I will talk to you guys another time. Thanks a lot. Bye.